Well, really honored today to have on the Valiant Living podcast Chris Anderson. And I'll let you kind of do your own introduction. But we were saying before we started recording, just really grateful because you've done a lot of amazing work with some friends of mine. So this feels personal because um, whenever someone, gives of their time and their talent, their wisdom, their experience to help, other brothers on their recovery journey, it's always really, really special. So a great gift to have you
Sure.
on today, brother.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
And now where are you hailing from now? Are you out in Texas?
Well, yeah, I was born and raised in Houston and went to school at UT in Austin and
Okay.
um, um, spent kind of jumping way ahead. I spent 28 years in the Chicago area from 1987 until 2015. I
Okay.
can't believe that. But before I woke up one morning in 2014 and thought, it's time to move back home. And so I put a plan, and I don't know how, didn't know how I was going to do that or how it was going to work, but put a plan in motion to do that. And my life has just been incredible. I mean, it was in Chicago,
Hmm.
but moving back home, it's been part of a huge one of the many circles,
Yeah,
great circles in my life. And so
that's cool.
yeah, so I my wife and I have a place in Austin, and that was hers, and then we have a place out in the country about 60 miles east of Austin, between Austin and Houston.
Um,
So that's actually where I am right now. Spend most of my time out here in the country.
Well, I can see the cowboy hat in the back, and you kind of look like
Yeah,
you're out on a ranch somewhere.
I,
So,
I am. Yeah, the people that we bought it from used to raise Arabian horses, so
oh, cool.
it's all decked out for that. And we do have horses, which is good. The good news, the better news is they're not ours. They belong to our neighbors. It's kind of like you want to have a friend who has a boat.
As a boat. I was thinking that when you said, I was thinking that exactly. My
Right.
brother has horses, and that's exactly how I like it.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
lot of work, man.
oh yeah, exactly. So
Yeah. Well, it's good.
yeah.
And you do a lot of telehealth stuff, so you can kind of do your work from anywhere these days, huh?
Well, you know what? That's just about all that I do. It's rare. Every now and then, because the people that I get to work with are scattered all over the country,
Mm-hmm.
and um, so I mean that's interesting. You mentioned that because when I had a big practice built up. I mean, I haven't really introduced myself yet, but kind of following our question thread,
Yeah.
I had a practice and a reputation in Chicago. And when I moved in 2015, I thought, well, what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time, as a therapist, people would sit in traffic for an hour and sit in my
Right.
office for an hour and spend an hour driving back home, and everything was face to face.
Right. Right.
And so when I moved back home here in 2015, there were some of the guys up there. I had a group going. They said, "Well, man, we'd like to continue," and other people said, we want to stay in touch." I said, "Well, I don't like talking on the phone, but we can give it a shot." you know. So uh, I was, and I don't even know if the word telehealth was even in place back then, but I was working by phone and video
Okay.
uh, way before COVID hit.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so when COVID hit, I know for a lot of people and a lot of clinicians in the field, and people in treatment programs, I mean, it was huge for me. It wasn't even a blip on the radar. What it did do, though, was it opened everybody up to the wonderful possibilities of being connected.
Yeah.
You know, being phone or video, and there's some aspects of it that are better and some aspects that you miss out on some things.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but doing phone work with people has been a
Yeah.
great gift because it enables me to leverage what I do in a way that I wasn't able to before.
Yeah, well, a lot of my buddies that you've worked with just at Valiant have come from all over. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
really
oh yeah,
enabled
yeah,
them
yeah.
to be able to work with you from wherever they're
Right,
at in the United States, which is awesome.
right. Exactly, and I mean, that continues. I mean, guys, I mean, literally scattered all over the country.
Yeah.
Um,
Now you
so,
you are very specifically deal with process addictions, very specific in gambling. Can you tell a little bit about
yeah,
your story, who you are? Because I'm really
yeah,
curious
right.
about I mean, I got so many questions here. This could be maybe a three-part series. I don't know. We'll see
Well,
where
it
it
well,
goes.
it well,
But
it yeah, it may be. So let me see if I can do the Cliff Notes version
yeah.
of this, which I'm not known for very well. But I've been a marriage and family therapist since 1979. Sometimes I mess up my decades now. Since 1979,
Okay.
and I can't believe I mean, I'm 72 years old, and I'm thinking, good Lord, my grandfather was 72 years old.
Right.
Well, I happen to be a grandfather with six grandkids now. So,
Oh, wow.
but I don't, it's hard for me to have a frame of reference about, how long it's been. So, uh, I went to graduate school, to a really great program in San Antonio, Texas, and um, had some really wonderful internships and experiences, and um, moved moved from San Antonio to Abilene, Texas. And some people listening may know where that is, but Abilene's just kind of out in the middle of West Texas. And wanted to move back to Austin and settle and raise the family. And I took a detour through the securities industry, which is a really strange shift. But
Yeah.
part of it, I'll tell you that I had some real financial anxieties because you know, as a therapist, or any business, if you're working by the hour,
Yeah.
which I was, there's only so many hours in the day and only so much money you can make per hour.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, man, how am I going to support a family on this? How am I going to do this? So I had the opportunity to go step sideways, actually a lot further sideways in the securities industry, which means I became a retail stockbroker, which is absolutely the last place that I needed to be. However, as is often the case in life, a lot of these twists and turns and screw ups end up being defining,
Hmm.
that fork in the road that really defines most of our life. So anyway, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know a stock from a bond, but I learned, and also got into experimenting with trading options just to try and figure out what is this like. And oh, by the way, in my family, I was known as a tightwad. I come from a
Really?
Scots Irish Presbyterian background, and I've got a great grandfather's ledgers where for years he used to record a half penny for a piece of candy or something. So, and and I was known in my family. I liked hanging on to my money, but um, so what I experienced was what a lot of people who cross that line into addiction. My very first options trade was I risked several $100s, and bought some Southwest Airlines call options. Now, what that simply means is it's just a leveraged way of being in the market.
Okay.
And some people listening know more about that. But anyway, what I experienced over, I don't remember, was a week or 2 weeks, that $200 was then worth $400. So the dollar amount didn't, that was nice. It wasn't life changing. What was radical, absolutely radical, was that I had experienced that $200 doubling in a matter of days, 100% rate of return
Hmm.
within a matter of days. And I don't know that I really understood it at the time, but thinking back on that, what I did with that, I said, well, good, wow. If I it, and I said, if I did that, well, I didn't do anything, but if I did that, if it was 2,000, it would be 4,000. If it was 20,000, it would be 40,000. And wait, if you take a dollar and you double it 21 times or 20 times, whatever it is, you got over $1 million. And I felt like I had discovered the keys to the mystery of the universe. And I believe that on the alcohol side, there are some of us, and I haven't had a drink since 1985. Um, uh, and there are many people, on the alcohol side. I believe I crossed over into the addiction with my first drink.
Mhm.
That's not true for everybody, but I'm convinced today that I crossed the line into the addiction with that very first. We didn't call it a wager; we call it speculative investing.
Right. It sounds way better.
Oh yeah. There's nothing wrong with In fact, that's a good thing. It's
Right.
going on all
Sure.
the time.
Sure.
But so the rate of return was extraordinary, and I have a whole terminology around that. Like my brain's reward system at that point got hijacked. I
Right.
got juiced just being in my head,
Right.
imagining the incredible amounts of money that I was going to make from this newfound
Yeah.
uh, get rich scheme. Well, not only did I not have any idea what I was doing, but also I didn't realize that when you're buying options, that's like I don't have the edge, you know, and so eventually I started losing,
Mhm.
and I started chasing, which means now I'm placing the next trade. I was going to say bet, but the next trade in order to win back the money that I lost.
Right.
And
And
I
then cycle.
had zero frame of reference for gambling
Right.
because I didn't gamble. I wouldn't even play penny ante poker with the guys, on the bus to the basketball game. So I didn't because I didn't want to lose my money. But boy, you
Right.
put me on a computer screen with numbers, and obviously this was way before iPhones. Uh, and so I was chasing. And anyway, it progressed to the point where I started borrowing money. I played credit card roulette. It means I take out a credit card and use that money and put it in the markets, and I would lose it. And then I would go get another credit card to use the money for that to make the payments on the first credit card.
Mm.
And it spiraled. And what's interesting back in those days, and this was in the early 1980s, obviously there was, you couldn't go online on the internet and move money. You literally had to go to a bank, present the physical credit card, and they would write you a bank draft.
Mhm.
And, and I, and something inside of me said something's not right here, because I remember I would go to different banks up and down Congress Avenue in Austin because I was afraid somebody would see me and catch me doing what I was doing, even though there was absolutely nothing illegal about, but there was something inside of me saying this isn't right. Well, anyway, um, I ended up in the best day of my life and the worst day of my life was when I went broke in the markets in September of 1986, a year before Black Monday.
Mm.
And I remember feeling relief, a strange sense of relief, because at that point I felt like I'd been on a runaway freight train and the bridge was out ahead. And I had also realized that what I was doing wasn't working, but I was responsible for taking care of my family, and
Mhm.
I didn't know what I was going to do.
Right.
And so I remember when I went broke, I think thank God it was over, because I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop.
Sure.
And not only that, but it was my job, right?
Right.
So I couldn't stop. And I went home and told my wife. Well, then reality hit, and I really came crashing down. Ended up in bankruptcy court with the bankruptcy trustee, talking about trying to take the china, crystal, and silver we'd been given for our wedding, and the amount of shame that I felt was extraordinary. And then then I remember going to I was, by the way, here's an aside. What I learned was that one of the best places to hide from an addiction is in a 12-step program. And I
Yeah.
love 12-step programs.
Right.
Don't get save my life. But I can go sit in an AA meeting and I can selectively, it's a key word, selectively hear people say, you can do anything you want to in life except take a drink. So the gambler in me was saying hallelujah.
Right.
Or I can go sit in a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I hear somebody say, and I've heard it thousands of times, you can do anything in your life except place a wager. So the overeater, the sex addict,
Yeah.
the alcoholic, the drug, and he says, hallelujah. We have this unique
Yeah.
ability to compartmentalize as addicts, right? And
Relate to
we
that.
can use truth
Hmm.
in the service of a bigger lie. That's what I mean when I talk about best place to hide from an addiction is in a 12-step program.
Hmm.
Well, I was talking to somebody and I was starting to have some urges to get back into the market. And I didn't want to do that. But guy who was my sponsor at the time said, well, you need to go home and talk to your wife about it. So I did. And I told her, and I really didn't want to. But she freaked out, filed for divorce, kicked me out of the house. And I went spiraling down into a suicidal depression and ended up being locked up in the suicide ward of Austin State Hospital.
Hmm.
Most frightened. I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, who had a similar. We were talking about this yesterday, and I mentioned him. That was the most frightened I had been, through the whole thing, and he said the same thing, being locked up in a psychiatric hospital,
Hmm.
and I thought I was going to lose the last bit of sanity that I had. Um, and by the way, I had I was surrounded by some really very smart, brilliant people, psychologists, psychiatrists,
Uh-huh.
getting the best help I could get. But what happens is, and this is a critical piece for me and why I do what I do, is when you're seeking help and you're seeing good people and nobody can help you really give a name to what's going on,
Hmm.
that process that you're involved that is about healing and health and wholeness and hope actually becomes a process of despair. If I'm getting this great help and I'm getting worse, then there's something fundamentally wrong with me.
Yeah.
So there's that whole theme then of the necessity and the power of giving a name to what is. And so that's
Yeah.
jumping in, but that's a theme of not only my life but the work that I do with people.
Right.
Our foundation is give a name to what is, and don't we really kind of do that, in stages? When we do a first step in the program, we admitted we were powerless. We don't work the first step. We
Yeah.
just affirm. In fact, we don't work step 1, 2, and 3, even though we use that language. Those are steps of affirmation.
Yeah.
I am. It's like we wake up, that veil of delusion and denial come crashing down. We see things. We see the what is. We see things for how they are, and we say, "Oh my God, I can't stop. I'm
Yeah.
powerless."
Yeah.
And my life is a complete disaster. Our lives have become unmanageable. So that's part of why I ended up in the psychiatric hospital. I was going to kill myself by driving out into the desert in West Texas, running out of gas and dying of thirst for 3 days. That's how much I hated myself. And I can talk about that today, 37 years later.
Hmm.
And sometimes I talk about it and have a lot of feelings, and other times I don't,
Hmm.
and I think most people in recovery have that. Kind of depends on the situation. So
Yeah.
I have some residual feelings about that. Um, Even to, now as we're talking about the level of despair. So nobody could help me give a name to what was going on with me until I talked my way out of the psychiatric hospital, went to Houston, went to my first GA meeting. There were no Gamblers Anonymous meetings in Austin at the time. And I'd been going to two AA meetings, a day.
Hmm.
So, very grounded. And by the way, had been through multiple treatment. I spent 6 weeks or 8 weeks at the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona in 1986.
Wow.
Pia Melody was still in the nurses station when I was there. I'd been to Terry Kellogg's Compulse. I'd done all kinds of stuff. And, but again, I had this, we talk about gambling as the hidden addiction. People didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't have a name for it. I just knew my whole world was crashing down. And so in that GA meeting, and I was at that place, and some addicts know when we're talking about one day at a time, especially if you're really suicidal, is that I need a reason to stay alive until tomorrow. I don't want to die. I don't want to kill myself, but I don't see another way out. But if I have a reason to stay alive until tomorrow, and that may have been a meeting, and I remember they said there's a conference in Dallas this week. This was on a Tuesday night. There's a conference in Dallas, and I thought, okay, I'm going, and I can stay alive until the conference starts on Friday. I mean, that's literally
Wow.
where I was, what my mental, that was a mess.
Yeah.
And I got there and found the hotel and was sitting on the floor. I mean, I was drained. A guy came along and met me and introduced himself. He said, my name's Arnie Wexler. And, Arnie's been a good friend for years and years. And uh, he said, what's going on? I told him. He said, well, I think there's somebody who can help you. So he literally helped pick me up off the floor, walk me in the room. And he said, Chris, I want you to meet Dr. Bob Custer. Well, Bob Custer was kind of equivalent of Dr. Bob on the AA side. I
Hmm.
mean, this is the guy who started the very first gambling treatment program, almost single-handedly got gambling addiction included in the DSM-3 in 1980. And so I'm standing here face to face with the guy.
Hmm.
Never heard of him, never met him. And remember, so I'm a practicing professional, a mental health professional.
Right.
I've lost my marriage, I've lost my family. I want to kill myself. I was a financial professional who was broke, so I wasn't feeling too good about myself. Nothing was lined up for me except
Sure.
it was all lined up. And I remember Bob, and I'll never ever forget this in my life. He looked at me in the eye and he said, "You're really hurting, aren't you?"
Mm.
Now, all I can tell you is that there was something in the look in his eye and the sound of his voice that I thought this guy can help me. And at that point, I moved from a place of despair to a place of hope. Had nothing, the reason I'm saying this, and some of your questions were, part of how does aspects of my experience inform,
Yeah.
how I am with others. These to me are critical instances that are part of the foundation. The naming of what is.
Yeah.
Just I know you don't want to look at it, you don't want to see it. You got your old fantasy world, you got your own denial, but here's what is.
Do you think
You
that's more
know,
prevalent in process addictions?
yeah,
Because, with the substance stuff, it's like, well, I'm clearly, I'm
right,
drinking, but
yeah,
gambling, sex addiction. Because
yeah,
I'll tell you, for me, I thank you for, first of all, for sharing your story. I mean, that's so powerful. And I wrote down that line you just said of "you're really hurting, aren't you?" That gave me
hmm
chill because there's so
yeah,
much
yeah,
kindness, love,
yeah,
empathy,
yeah,
attunement. I
yeah,
mean, when I had my intervention, my therapist, the first thing he said to me was, "How long have you been in pain?"
yeah, right,
I had suppressed pain for so long, I didn't even know I was in pain. The
right,
question was, I was like, "What?" And so similarly, I didn't know I was an addict until I found myself in Denver in a rehab.
right.
I mean, I didn't
Yeah,
know.
you didn't have a name. You didn't have a name for that stuff.
I had no
Yeah,
idea what was going on. I didn't know
mhm,
intimacy disorder. I don't know about any of this
right,
stuff.
right.
This is how I survived the world. Like this was
Yeah.
my, so do you think that's more prevalent in process type addictions and gambling or no?
Well, yeah. What we haven't talked about is the addictive process of gambling.
Okay.
And let me tell you, and this is another key piece in Gamblers Anonymous meeting. In AA we read the big book.
Mhm.
In GA meetings, there's something called the combo book, which is a little 17-page pamphlet. And what I read on that Tuesday night was the page that the heading is "What is the dream world of the compulsive gambler?" I had no idea, and I read that. I read that two or three paragraphs, and
Say that line again, just in case, because I feel like you might have.
what is the dream world of the
Okay.
compulsive gambler?
Okay.
And I read that. I just passed the book around, and just happened. I mean, I don't believe in accidents, but I also don't believe in a God who's got everything mapped out and orchestrated. And by God, you better figure out whether you're supposed to take a right turn or a left turn.
Yeah,
You know,
if you miss
but
it, you're screwed. Yeah, no, I don't believe that either.
but I'm real clear that I was being carried through a lot of this, And the reason I mention that is because to me, what it's talking about is the primary process of the addiction. Let me put that on hold. Tell you, I met Bob Custer. He said, you need to be in treatment. And I thought, well, okay. And he said, go talk to Gene, secretary. And Gene said, yeah, if you get us $5,000. And I said, Gene, why don't you ask me for 5 million? I got nothing.
Right.
But I called a friend in Houston who was a doctor, actually my eye doctor, and they had lost a son to addiction and they'd gotten all kinds of help. He knew me, knew my in-laws, was a great guy. And I said, Ralph, I'm in trouble. He said, yeah, I know. He said, but I think I found somebody who can help me. And almost before I got those words out of my mouth, he said, I want to talk to him. And so all I know is that my friend talked to whoever, and they made it possible for me to go into a private psychiatric treatment program in Ellicott City, Maryland. And I spent 30 days there, and I was watching people get kicked out right and left, and I'm moving my way through this. And after that, this was in March of 1987. Ended up in Chicago and reconnected with my ex-wife and my little kids. And problem there is we didn't have anybody who understood gambling addiction because Bob Custer had gotten sick and he had died, and I'd been on some medication that became toxic, one of the old tricyclic antidepressants, imipramine. Didn't know that. So what I say is I've had a few psychiatrists save my life, and I've also been malpracticed on by some too. Uh,
Mm,
but I landed in the hotbed of gambling expansion.
okay.
And people in GA, reason I started doing this is people in GA said, well, you know what you do professionally and you're a gambler. Can you help us? And I said, man, I'm still trying to figure out which way is up and which way is down. I'm happy to talk to you. So my whole practice of treating gambling was not something that I sat down and developed a business plan. It
Right.
happened as a result of my struggle and my desire to do whatever I could to to find some degree of healing and recovery from this addiction that had taken everything from me but my life. And it just literally just built, and I became executive director of the Illinois Council on Problem and Compulsive Gambling, board member of the National Council on Problem Gambling, set up the National Helpline, or chaired
Man.
that committee, on and on and on and on. And so it just blew wide open from there. In addition to, I spent 10 years in domestic relations court in Cook County, had a really angry ex-wife who was funded by some very wealthy people.
Mm.
So I learned how to practice law without a license,
Right.
learned how the court system worked or didn't work, as the case may be. And as a result of my experience there, stumbling through that, I've been retained as an expert witness in close to 60 legal cases in both state and federal court for gamblers who have crossed the line into illegal activity. The,
Mm.
the theme underneath that, one of my great teachers is a Franciscan priest named Richard Rohr, and I love what he says. He says, we get there by getting it wrong.
Mm. I
And
love
I have gotten there by getting it wrong. And the God that I know has taken what I have screwed up and put it back together in a whole different way. And so, I find myself every time, you were talking about our mutual friends here, every time I get to talk to one of these guys, I have some gratitude.
Yeah.
And I can say, look, here's what I know. What I know is you can make it. And the
Mhm.
reason I know you can make it is because I'm here to tell you you can make it. What I don't know is what all the twists and turns and challenges you got. I mean, I know some of them, and I can walk you through that.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's that. That's how I stumbled into this, and I consider again, everybody I get to talk to is a gift, and it's a two-way street.
Yeah. Well, and you've done amazing work just helping shed light on this specific addiction, and so where people aren't having the same, struggle that you're having, they're able to name it thanks to a lot of the great work that
Right.
you're doing. It's becoming a
Yeah.
little more commonplace, people
Right.
understanding. I was talking to my buddies that have worked with you, and man, the stuff that they're sharing with me, the enlightenment, the aha moments, them being able to name And I
Yeah.
mean, we were in a retreat together just a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
and because of the work they've done with you, they're able to really, now I'm not saying their lives are up and to the right, but at least they're able
Mhm.
to name now, this is what's going on in me, and this is why it's causing me to want to do these things, these behaviors.
Right.
And
Right.
to me, I'm like, I told him, I was like, that's a win right there. You're not
Oh
doing
yeah. Oh
it.
yeah.
You're
Yeah.
catching yourself and you're realizing this is why I'm doing it. And I mean, even something like this, and we might get into this later, but one thing I learned in from my friends who's battled with gambling addiction, I had thought it was about the money, getting the money and getting the thing. And my buddy told me, Drew, I want to get the money so I could place larger bets. It was never for him about getting the money and stopping,
Right. Right.
And there's
Yeah.
things like that that I didn't understand. So I'm so happy to have you
Right.
here and help
Yeah.
us understand a little bit more because we've got
Yeah.
families that are going to listen to this, not just the
Yeah.
addicts themselves, but
Yeah.
people that are just don't have a frame of reference. So I'm just curious, how would you define gambling addiction and what is that? How does it separate itself from other substance use disorders?
Okay. Uh, here's my short form answer to this. What separates gambling addiction from every other addiction is the reality that you can place the next bet and win. What that means is it's the only, here's the flowery language, Ren. What that means is it's the only addiction whereby you can engage in the addiction and solve problems created by the addiction. The, which is another way of saying I lost my last bet. The way to solve that problem is not to quit
No.
at all, because if I quit, I lock in those losses. Now, this is the mind of the gambler. So the way to solve this is to get some more money together, place the next bet, and win. And what I told you in my story is I experienced a big win right off the bat. That's common. So it's not about the money, and it is about the money. It's
Okay.
it's not either or. It's a both and. It damn sure is about the money. If it wasn't about the money, then go play a simulated game on your computer. Okay,
Right.
so that takes us into so what separates it is the fact that you can win, which is why there's so few GA meetings, because
Yeah.
people walk into a GA meeting and hear we're here to stop gambling, not control it. And in my mind, I think, well, I got to watch my language here, but if if how am I going to solve my financial problems if I can't place the next bet?
Right. That's my way out.
That's my way. It's what got me in is also the way out. Now, I have a
Never.
brother who died of his heroin addiction in 2001. So I'm also on the family side of addict, of losing that. And, uh, some alcohol issues in my family with my dad. And I got a brother who's in recovery for many years from his alcohol issues. So, I have the experience of this from both sides. But what happens is that um, I can, in fact, so one of the things I say to people, I said, if anybody tells you, I mean, this is usually part of a first conversation with somebody. Let me ask you a question. Uh, you ever placed a bet and won? Well, of course, right? If all you did was lose, you wouldn't keep doing it.
That's what hooks you, right? That's the
That's
feeling that
that it's so that's why we say it's not the losing that's the problem, it's the winning. I mean, it's got to be right when you listen to it. It's no, it's actually it's both and.
hear you. Yeah.
But in terms of getting hooked, why? Because when I win, what I tell myself is this is easy. I didn't do it. If you bet in sports, this is easy. All I did was just sit on my couch and, eat some popcorn or potato chips or whatever and watch other people play. And, I bet $100 and now I got $200. And at my job, if I'm working for 25 bucks an hour, that's 4 hours of work. And I didn't do anything and I made the equivalent of 4 hours of work. So the money is critical in terms of how we measure. But here's the most critical piece. The To state the obvious, you can't get drunk if you don't drink.
Right.
Right? Uh, uh, And we'd say that you can't get high unless you do the line of cocaine, but that's not exactly true, because what we know is that with cocaine addicts, they get a buzz in anticipation of. Okay, so here's the other answer to that question of what separates it. Is it gambling addiction and sex addiction? And I would argue relationship addiction, take place not in reality, but in the fantasy world. The 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 dopamine hit. Let me see if I can make this simple. The dopamine hit does not come uh, afterwards. It comes from the anticipation of.
Hmm.
All I have, let me say another way. Every one of us knows exactly what it's like to sit here right now, remember something that happened yesterday or in the past, and have feelings about it today. Well, that's kind of if we look at it, it's kind of a dissociation. It's not happening. It's
Right.
done. But I'm having feelings about it. We all know what it's like to think about something happening tomorrow, or I'm going on vacation a week and I'm really excited about it. Hadn't happened, not there, but I'm having feelings about it right here, right now,
Mhm.
about something that hasn't happened in the future. So we're all wired that way.
Right.
What happens, and where this becomes an addictive process, is when I pack up and move lock, stock, and barrel from an address in reality and the here and the now to an address out in the future.
Yes.
And so I'm sitting here in the future, in the present, and in my head, and I'm thinking, oh crap, I just lost $500, or I'm 5,000, or whatever it happens to be. That doesn't feel good. Well, with substance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a substance to change how I feel.
Hmm.
To mask, to numb, to
Hmm.
with gambling, all I got to do is jump up into my mind instantaneously and think, okay, I know I just got this credit card application. I'll fill that out. I'll send it in. I'll get the credit limit. I'll use that. I'll win, and I will, solve the problem of the money that I just lost. And I can have that thought in the blink of an eye. And as soon as I have that thought of the solution,
Hmm.
I feel internally as if it's real.
Wow.
Now, think of the implications of that.
Yeah.
I mean, so what happens is the gamblers in treatment programs, they may look, act, walk, and talk like they're, fully engaged and participating and get it, but I guarantee you there's a whole world going on.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so maybe it'd help if
Created
I
like an
tell you,
alternate reality. There's another whole alternate
it is an
universe.
alter, it is completely an alternate, and it's called, I mean, that if anybody listening wants to read specifically the most concise write-up about this, it's called "What is the Dream World of the Compulsive Gambler?" It's on page 11 in the Gamblers Anonymous combo book. So that was the passage that I read, and that is the foundation of the work that I do with gamblers. It's so and I'm wave hopping over some stuff, so slow me down if you.
This is great. This is great.
But what is that what I say to guys, mostly guys, I work with some women too, is that what's necessary is that you become willing, and practice thinking about your
Mm.
thinking about your thinking, which is another way of saying be conscious, wake up, because well, gambling is only one of three diagnoses in the whole DSM, of which lying is a central feature. And the one we lie to the most is ourself. We call it self-deception.
Mhm.
Here's how this plays out. If I tell myself, let me take a scenario. I'm down. See, there's all this language. No, I've lost $25,000. But see that it it has a different feeling to say I lost $25,000 than to say I'm down 25K,
Well, the
or I'm
implications
down.
would be back up again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So see, we have all these ways linguistically of reframing reality so I don't have to feel.
Right. Right.
And it's all done up in our head. It's not doesn't come from ingesting, biting, sniffing, snorting, chewing, shooting, drinking, anything.
Right.
All I do is jump up in my head and I tell myself a story, and I alter my brain chemistry from the story that I tell myself. That is the single most, and the guys, the people who are in recovery from this addiction are ones, and I think you actually mentioned this, are the ones who say, yeah, I'm conscious of my thinking.
Yes,
Not fully, I'm conscious and I'm becoming conscious.
that's right.
I'm conscious of my thinking because, I mean, the reason that's necessary is because if I tell myself, all right, I can place the next bet and win, that is a absolutely true statement. If a therapist, if I'm in seeing a therapist for my gambling problem, they said, don't you know you're just going to lose? I'm thinking, you know what the hell you're talking about.
Right.
You can't help me. You don't know what I'm talking. You don't know what you're talking about, because the fact is, I have won and I have won a lot. So we talk about that from the beginning. All right, tell me what you've won. And by the way, can you place the next bet and can you win? Well, yeah, always, yeah, but then I'm no, wait. See, as addicts, we never want to stay where we are, and
Yeah,
so
right.
so I was like, wait a second. My question was, can you place the next bet and win? Well, yeah, okay. So if you tell yourself that, what do you think you're going to do? Well, I don't know. Well, yeah, you do. What are you going to do if you tell yourself you're going to place the next bet and win? It's a lock that you're going to place the next bet.
Yeah. Yep.
Which have you've done? How many times have you done that? Oh, over and over and over again. All right. So what we're doing is we're just getting inside each other's heads.
So it's
And
it's
and go
acknowledging
ahead.
the possibility. Like what I'm hearing you say is you're bringing
Mm-hmm.
to light, and man, I relate to a lot of this stuff of stuff I've learned in Valiant of like
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging and honoring the truth of the situation. What's
That's
actually
right.
instead of like for me in anxiety, it does me no good to pretend like I don't have anxiety or I'm gonna whatever. Like I
Right.
have to say I feel fear right now,
Right.
and I have to kind of name it, give it like, and that's what
Right.
I'm hearing you say with the addiction side of the
Yeah. Yeah.
gambling. You have to
Yeah.
acknowledge I could win. That's part of me, understanding the addiction.
That's right. And it's that possibility that I
Mm,
can win that keeps me going.
right. Right.
Absolutely keeps me going.
Yeah.
Now, what happens though is, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but what we want to do, and this is one of the great themes, is people in recovery finish the story. So let me finish that story. Yeah, I can win, and then I can take those winnings and I can win more, and because I've done it in the past. You hear stories constantly. Yeah, a guy told me yesterday. Yeah, I was down 22,000, and I went on a run, and then was only down 21,000, which means that I'm a big winner. Well, actually, no, you're not, because you still lost $1,000. But that's not how I feel. What I'm telling myself is I won $21,000, but I'm kind of conveniently minimizing the fact
Yeah.
that before that I'd lost 22,000. This is all part of the mind games that we play. And so my job, my primary job as a therapist, is to help you slow down enough to help you tell yourself the whole story. So the whole story is, if I win, because my fantasy is I'm going to win a bunch of money and live on easy street. That's about as far as it goes. Okay, well, have you won? Yeah. What'd you do? Oh, I placed some more bets. Well, why'd you do that? Well, because I wanted more. Well, more what? Well, more money. So that what? So that I could get more money. That gets,
Right. Right.
and what it really is, over time, it may start out being about money. But any addiction has there's the underlying
Mm,
aspects of it. But then any addiction then takes on a life of its own, separate and apart from, and
mm,
also connected to whatever those underlying triggers are. And there's, I mean, or you know, uh, life experiences. What gives rise. What I say is that uh, the gambling industry, which is changed their name to the gaming industry, which is now it's the entertainment industry. And oh, by the way, the state lotteries used to be called the numbers racket before they legalized it. So see, we change
yeah.
these names, which changes the impact. And
Right.
and the bigger picture gambling, which used to be under the heading of crime, vice, sin, illegal, amoral, now has become seen as the salvation of the state's economy. And there's a huge poker game going on between the states. I mean, Texas doesn't have legalized gambling except in a few areas. And now we got to have legalized, we got to have casinos because Texas money is going across the border into Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Louisiana, which is exactly the same thing. When I was Illinois, oh, Illinois, we're losing money over to,
Right.
Iowa and Indiana and Michigan. So we got to, it's just a giant poker game. It's a giant shell game.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough of that. Enough of that riff. But point is that the dopamine rush comes from telling myself I can win.
Hmm.
It's that complicated and it is that simple.
Yeah.
Now, what happens though is if I tell my and oh by the way, the termination of the bet marks the end of that fantasy.
Okay.
It's like orgasm. There's all the anticipation, the build
Right.
up, and
Right.
people don't study about the physiology. And
Right.
after orgasm, there's a whole different physical and emotional state that kicks in.
Uh-huh.
There's the build up, and then there's the drop off. So it's almost the same with gambling, which is kind of why a number of the gamblers I work with were also sex addicts, even though that's not an official diagnosis. It's still real. Maybe 20-30%. And what happened by the time I left Chicago, half of my caseload were guys with sex addiction because the strategies
Hmm.
that I came up with the help of working with a lot of guys, talking through just kind of how we're talking now to try and understand this,
Yep.
worked exactly the same with sex addiction. That takes place all in fantasy. It's all about the chase.
Yes.
It's all about the fantasy. Porn. It's what's the next video. So point is we're not living in the present moment.
Yeah.
We're living in anticipation of what's going to happen next. And that's the hijacking of the brain's reward system, if you will, because the dopamine comes from the anticipation
Yeah.
of what's happening next.
Wow. That's really good.
And and so if we know that, if we name that process, and I have done over 350 professional trainings, and I was talking to somebody, good friend of mine, Richard Rosenthal, who's a co-author of the DSM-4 diagnostic criteria. And I said, Richard, I just did a calculation. I said, I've been working with gamblers for at least the last 37 years. And I figure if I just figure simply 20 hours a week times 50 weeks, that's 1,000 hours a year. And that doesn't count other stuff going on. It's 1,000 times 30. I said, Richard, that's 37,000 hours. Good Lord. So anyway, what I'm telling you comes out of um, trying to constantly understand what is this stuff about, what's going on in our heads, how does this manifest? And I had a lot of people who helped really give me some clarity, not knowing it, but
Yeah.
in giving a name to that. But I want to underline this. The primary process of the addiction is the escape into a fantasy world. There's one specific reference to that in the newest edition of the Big Book of AA. It's in one of the stories, and I could find it, but where he said, "I had to stop living in this fantasy world and get grounded in reality." That's a summation.
Yeah.
So what happens is if you imagine this addiction is about the escape from reality into the fantasy world,
Hmm.
and I fuel the fantasy world by telling myself the story that I can place the next bet and win, and that's going to solve some or all of my life problems. And internally, I have that flood of dopamine. I have a flood of well-being, and everything is right with the world, even though Rome is burning.
Yeah.
Don't worry, the fire trucks are on their way. They're right around the corner, so it doesn't matter. You see, if I live in now, isn't that interesting? Because I just thought about this. In the program, we talk about living into the solution as opposed to the problem.
Yeah.
Well, here's the other thing about gambling. It's the great life metaphor, and it's a few degrees off from the truth. It looks, acts, walks, and talks, but it is a universe apart.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, what you're talking about, what's so interesting to me is I relate to so much of what you're saying even though I don't know that I've ever gambled one. I don't. I mean, I'm sure I have, but that's just not. It's not my particular pathway. But what I love about the work you do, the work that's done at Valiant, is when you go layers below the thing. Now, gambling definitely has some things that you've helped us understand is different.
Mhm.
But when it comes to shame cycle or
Mhm.
and the future feels like the safest place for me. Like if I
Yeah.
feel fear, if I can just get into the future and I can, go buy a domain name for a new business. I mean, that just feels like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the one that's going to really hit. And that's like, and everything you're saying, I'm just like, wow, I relate so much to
Correct.
the fantasy world of let me escape the moment, which is scary,
Right.
live in a safer place that is
Yeah.
a fiction.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, what you just said is a couple things. One is you mentioned anxiety earlier.
Mhm.
So in the mind of the gambler, if I'm sitting here and I'm imagining, actually, out of the text it says all the good things in life that are just all the good, wonderful things in life that are just around the corner after the big win is finally made. Just
Mm,
around the corner means in the future.
yep.
So it doesn't matter what's happened in the past. It doesn't matter because tomorrow is going to fix it. The ship comes in tomorrow.
Mhm.
And when I tell myself that, then all is right in the world,
Right.
which is why you can't tell whether a gambler is under the influence or not, like you could with, you know,
Sure.
somebody's drunk, unless you're impaired yourself.
Yeah.
You don't care what they say about how much they've had to drink. You can smell it on their breath.
Yep.
They can't walk straight, whatever.
Yep.
But gamblers, you can't tell. That's which is why we call it the hidden addiction. All right, now here's the interesting thing. I'm getting the feel good because I'm telling myself a wonderful story. Well, what about the flip side of that same coin, where I'm living into the disaster in the future that hasn't yet occurred? That's an anxiety disorder.
Mhm. Mhm.
Exactly the same process. It's
Interesting.
it's like the guy who said there've been a great many crises in my life, many of which never even occurred. I don't know whether that was Mark Twain
Yeah.
uh, but there been but so people, it's the same process with anxiety. Is where you living? Well, I'm living out into the disaster
That's
that
right.
hasn't yet occurred, and paralyzed by fear in the present about something that hasn't even happened. It's not real, it doesn't exist, but our body doesn't know the difference, which
Yeah.
again is why it is so critical
Yeah.
for us to think about our thinking. Wait, what's the story you're telling yourself in your head?
Mhm.
All right, so the intervention, if I know that the primary process is the escape from reality into fantasy, then the intervention is step one, two, and three. Step one, I recognize, I acknowledge, I'm conscious of the fact that I live in a fantasy world.
Mhm.
Step two, I'm willing to interrupt that. Oh. And step three, I take steps to interrupt that.
Mm, okay.
So that's the healing journey from this addiction that takes place all in the mind. I have to be conscious, right? I have to acknowledge that I do that.
Mhm.
And then I've got to be willing to interrupt that. And I'll tell some guys, you may not be ready. You may say, you know what, I know I'm doing that, but it feels too good to trip out in this sex fantasy,
Mhm.
or it feels too good to trip out into this fantasy of making a bunch of money trading crypto and not ever having to work again. That feels too good, and I don't want to go of it. Okay, that's your choice.
Yeah. They're not ready.
It's just your life. But yeah, it's your life. You don't have to.
Yeah.
So what happens then is if I tell myself the rest of the story, like, yes, if I place the next bet and I win, I'm going to want to win more. And then when I start losing, I'm going to want to place the next bet to win the money back. And then I'm going to lose more. Then I'm going to start borrowing money. Then I'm going to cross the line and steal money if it goes to that. Then I'm going to feel like shit. And then, okay, so see if in my head, if I finish the story, the probability of me placing that bet is dramatically diminished.
Right.
So when we talk about relapse prevention,
Right.
the old adage, and we all relapse before we relapse.
Right. Right.
So with relapse, it's, are you conscious of the story you're telling yourself in your head? And that's, again, I mean, there's a lot of other pieces of it, but I keep going back. That's the primary And a lot of times we stay kind of more at the surface of, well, I did this and I did that. And, well, okay, go to another meeting. Well, what's important to me and that's good. Meetings are great because it helps us become conscious. But one of the changes in the 12 steps for GA, it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to a normal way of thinking and living as opposed to sanity. Now, I don't know that normal is a good word, maybe healthy, but the key word there is thinking.
Yeah.
And so again, and when I'm talking to other treatment providers, it's like, okay, understand that this person's under the influence they're actively using when they're sitting on the couch, because guess what? They're also in their mind creating the image of
Hmm.
the person in recovery and feeling as if that's true. Hadn't done a bit of work.
Right.
But after 2 or 3 days, all they got to do is come into the treatment program, look around, survey the situation, get the
Yep.
lay of the land, learn
Yep.
learn what the rules are, learn what the lingo is, the language is. Because
Yep.
guess what? Gamblers are also cons too.
Yeah.
We're
Master
liars, cheats,
guys. Yeah.
cons, and thieves.
Well, let's go here for just a second because you've given
Yeah.
us a really great, better understanding. I know that was still a flyover. I mean, okay, there's a deeper well you could go there, but I want to pivot towards families.
Yeah.
Um, Specifically the impact that gambling addiction has on family over maybe over different types of addiction.
Okay.
Is it the
Yeah.
same?
No, no, not at all. Again, there's a part of there's an addiction is an addiction is addiction, but the way it manifests, very seldom have I encountered the spouse or family member of an alcoholic who didn't know that they were drinking or using. I mean, sometimes with some drugs you can keep it hidden for a while.
Hmm.
Uh, and 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 if they're minimizing, then we talked about the family members being in denial. Well, denial is an unconscious defense mechanism. Well, there's a radical difference between being in denial of that which you know but you don't want to admit to yourself for
Right.
whatever reason, and not knowing.
Right.
I got a call in the late '90s from Jim Webb from Jim Webb of the Associated Press. No, it's from Martha Shirk of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Actually, you can read about this. If people go to my website, ChristopherWAnderson.com, there's a link to a long Chicago Reader article that has some really interesting
Cool.
stories in there. But anyway, so Martha Shirk calls me and introduces herself. I was doing a lot of interviews. And she said, Chris, I want to talk to you about the Collinsville, and this chokes me up, about the Collinsville, Illinois woman who was found dead in the parking lot of Walmart or Kmart. She'd blown her head off with a
Wow.
45. And I said, man, I hadn't heard about that one. I said, I know about a number of the other suicides. I said, tell me about that. She said, well, she was gambling. Her husband was, I think, a factory where I may have some of the facts wrong here, but was a factory worker. And the sheriff came to evict them from the house. And her husband didn't have a clue because she handled all the finances, did
Mm.
not have a clue. And she went and killed herself.
Wow.
So it would be rare, if somebody was drinking to the degree that this woman was gambling,
Right.
it'd have been obvious. There was nothing hidden. And so what that means is the implications of that are significant. So what happens, and I work with a lot of couples, is the guy steps in, assuming it's the guy who's the gambler, steps into recovery and is relieved. It's
Mm.
like, okay, the secret, everybody knows. Well, not everybody knows everything because you're still sandbagging a
Right. Right.
few pieces of information, but I'm relieved because I'm no longer hiding. I'm no longer living this lie. And what happens is that the trauma that the gambler's been living with all those years, knowing
Right.
and
Hmm.
struggling with it and doing battle with themselves, all of a sudden the wife, assuming it's a marriage, gets hit with, wait, you what? We're what? What do you mean you haven't been making the house payments?
Right.
What do you mean the house is getting foreclosed on? What
Right.
And that's what cost me my marriage. My wife didn't know,
Yeah.
and I think it was and you know, I mean, I get choked up with this. It is absolutely devastating
Sure.
because then you begin to wonder, well, why didn't I see that? What's wrong with me? Why didn't I see that?
Right. They just get blindsided.
You get absolutely blindsided. Yeah. So to me, that's categorically different
And it
than,
has an impact on their life too. I mean, if it's
oh, well,
their, I mean, not that the other addictions don't, but a lot of times that's something you're doing to yourself and it impacts, but like a lot of times that's their money too, or that's their,
well,
am I
well,
right?
depending on what state you live in, like in
Yeah.
Texas, it's a community property state. So guess what? He's been poking holes in this ship and it's been taking on water and it's not going to get bailed out. You go down with the ship.
Oh,
And so his debts are your debts. His
yeah,
liabilities are your liabilities. Now, if it gets in divorce court, but yeah, because in most marriages, if we're talking about marriage, your spouse is your business partner.
sure.
And I tell people this. I said, look, your marriage is a legal business financial partnership. And if you don't know that now, if you end up in divorce court, you will learn that. The court could care less about who loved who did what. It's simply the division of property. So you go down with the ship. And so,
Yeah.
spouse is home at work, taking care of whatever, and all of a sudden discovers that they're bankrupt and the house is going to be foreclosed on.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
got to sit in front of a bankruptcy court. I mean, I didn't sign up for this.
Right.
So the impact of that is extraordinary, which means that, especially in early recovery, the gambler and the spouse are in two very, very different places
Mhm.
emotionally, both in turn. I mean, the spouse is like just got blindsided and is traumatized, where the gambler is relieved and say, well, why is she still pissed off? I haven't gambled in a month.
Right.
Hey,
Yeah. I'm good now.
up here.
Yeah.
Go, go. Well, wait a second. It's it's a common phenomenon. It's one of those I put my teacher's hat on and say, wait a second, I understand you guys are in very, very different places with this.
Yeah.
So that's part one. Part two, and I'm doing a workshop on this for the state of Delaware, and I think that, I don't know, first week in December or something, about parents of gamblers. Here's an interesting phenomenon that happens with gambling. It's what I call the hostage situation.
Okay.
So what happens is I'm sitting in my office in Evanston, Illinois, years ago, and I'm sitting there with a kid who's maybe 21, maybe 18, 19, 20, I don't know, 20, 21, with his older brother and mom and dad. He's got a gambling problem. This is kind of an intervention. And at one point in the discussion, he looks at them and says, if you all don't pay my $18,000 credit card bill, I'm going to kill myself.
Oh, wow.
Just came flat out, right out, and said that. And as a
Wow.
clinician, I'm thinking, oh shit, you
Yeah.
know. So I'm good at thinking, pretty fast. I'm pretty fast on my feet with my thinking, and I don't want to tell you the long story, but the bottom line is I told him, look, I'm what's called a mandated reporter. If I think you're serious, I got to call the cops. They'll arrest you. They'll lock you up. They'll keep you for 48 hours. Find out whether you really mean that. If you don't, then you can get out and then you can go kill yourself. See, I'm in a poker game with this. I'm in a poker game. And the most extreme form of poker, by the way, is Russian roulette, where you wager your life.
Right. Right.
So I'm playing a poker game. But my real challenge is with mom and dad, because I think, oh my God, if we don't write an $18,000 check, our son's going to kill himself. That is a hostage situation. He's saying, I got a gun to my head, and if you don't pay the ransom,
Yeah.
I'm going to pull the trigger,
Yeah.
literally.
That's
And
heavy.
and that was one of those great revelatory moments for me, where this kid actually unwittingly helped me give a name to a common phenomenon, and that is the abiding fear that parents have. And the biggest problem with young kids is they haven't lost anything. Mom and dad have. So when I get a call from mom and dad, first question is, okay, how much have you written in checks?
Mm.
And by the way, little Johnny doesn't have a problem. You do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He hadn't lost anything. You have.
You
Well,
lost.
yeah, but he told us he was being threatened. You know, he was at college and he was being threatened. I said, okay. And so you wrote a check because he told you that he was being threatened, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, we don't want to be, that is a hostage situation. And so uh, that's what this whole workshop is going to be about, is how you deal with that, but also separating fact from fiction.
Yeah.
So those are, when we talk about the family, uh, uh, how do you recover financially?
Hmm.
How do you rebuild? I mean, the challenges are immense.
Yeah.
And the worst situations that I have experienced. Well, here's the thing with money: if you got time and willingness, you can recover. And we say this, and nobody believes it. Of all the problems, the easiest to deal with is the money.
Hmm.
Look, if you don't have it, they can't get it,
Hmm.
and even if you have it, they can't get all of it. All right, so let's work on a plan. In fact, Gamblers Anonymous has something called a pressure relief process. Has been done since the late 1950s. That
Hmm.
is strictly about pulling down your financial pants with members of GA and Gamma on look at your finances, developing a repayment plan that does not compromise the well-being of your family. If
Hmm.
it's debt, I don't care if you got to pay it back over 200 years.
Hmm.
Okay. But the easiest to deal with is the money, but it's used as leverage, it's used as threats. So there's a whole lot, there's a whole
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
that's a whole sidebar there. But yeah, it's devastating for family members. It takes a really long time to recover.
So, Chris, this is so helpful, man. I mean, it's new for me, but there's a lot of things that you're saying that I relate to, but there's also some very, very significant differences. And
Mhm.
we'll have to have you back on again if you're willing,
Let's
because
do it.
I
Absolutely.
think I got to question 3 of 15. There's so much more we have to talk about here, but
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
rich. I mean, what you're sharing is
Yeah.
so great, and
Yeah.
I know for our families that are listening, and even the men that might be coming to our program, um, it's 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 life changing work that you're
Yeah.
doing. I mean,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
so grateful for what you're doing. But I want to save a little space here at the end,
Yeah.
just to let you recap, or not recap, but like what would you want us to know, or someone listening right now that might be, it could be a warning sign, or help kind of guide us through some next steps.
Yeah. I think, boy, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Well, what I would say is that whatever's going on with you, there's a way through it. Or I was going to say there's a way out, but the way out is right through the middle of it.
Hmm.
And the other thing I'll say, and most of us as addicts have this experience until we learn otherwise. I'm the only damn fool in the world doing what I'm doing, which is one of the beauties of the 12-step fellowship is you learn
Yep.
you're sitting in a circle with a bunch of other only damn fools.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that there's a way out, and it's not your way.
Mm.
And there's plenty of people out there with gambling who are more than happy for you to work for your money or for you to be gifted money and for you to give it to them. They're lining up to take it, and they will thank you. You know that the wager has two components. One, you either win or lose. There's no in between. It's black or white, all or nothing, either or, which is kind of the mind of the addict, right? The all or nothing thinking. Only this is what wagering is. The other is that when anybody places a bet, the outcome is outside of our control.
Hmm.
So every time I place a bet, I I I I place my bet, I sit back and I wait for something to happen that is outside of my control, whether it's a slot machine, a horse race, but outside of my control. And it's the outcome of that event that is outside of my control that determines for me whether I'm a winner or a loser. So I've handed control of my life
Hmm.
over to the outcome of a wager, which means I'm a victim.
Hmm.
Every time you place a bet, now you don't feel like a victim if you win,
Right. Right.
but you do when you lose. So this is about you're not in charge of your life when you place a bet. You're handing that control over to that which is outside of your control. So, man, it's this life is the one we have. Maybe it'd be nice to take charge and responsibility and experiencing the gift of the life that we have for our very breath.